Racists everywhere. Also, how's your IQ? Does it control your destiny? Does it control your fate? Today, we peer into some unfortunate parent's basement for a closer look at the alt-right. You're listening to Constructive Interference. So, we're going to get into some pretty heavy stuff today, but before we do, are you following us on social media yet? If you're not, I just don't even know what to say at this point. It's 2019, people. Get with the times. Go follow Constructive Interference on social media. Facebook.com/TheCI Show. On Twitter @TheCI Show. And also you can find us on Google Play and iTunes. Okay, so are you a racist? If you were, how would you even know? Is that something we can know about ourselves, or do you have to be told whether you're a racist or not? Is there like a racist chart somewhere where you can go find yourself? Josh Hugo, are you a racist?
Well, I've been told that I am.
Well, okay, so So do you have a reliable source that can tell us all whether we're racist or not?
Well, I guess there are certain people who I know, some of them who are elected in politics, some of whom are just, people floating around, and I guess they'll tell you if you're racist. And you just have to take their word for it because, according to these people, my own introspection is of no use.
Oh, so you have to mail in an application and $50 or something like that, or do you just have to say something that they think is racist and then they'll tell you?
Well, you mostly just have to not be a Democrat, has been my experience. Basically, if you're not a Democrat, then you're a racist, and if you are, then you probably aren't.
Oh, is that how that works?
I guess so. It's the only standard I've been able to tell. I guess how you actually treat, the people who you meet in your life and the things you actually say don't seem to make a whole lot of difference in our popular conception nowadays.
Figures. Well, up here in my home state of Iowa, we have got a congressman by the name of Steve King who has often been in hot water over things that he said, but he's reached a little bit of a new level this last week.
A boiling point?
Yeah, you could say that. Now, the charge of racism is often brought against anybody who's a hardliner on immigration, right? Because the immigration crowd immediately says if you want a wall off the border, if you want a strict immigration process, if you're a hardliner on that, then you must be a racist. You just must hate everyone that's trying to come in, and that's why. And Steve King has been at the center of a lot of controversy. Some people might remember he had the unfortunate terminology where he talked about people like kids crossing the southern border who had calves the size of cantaloupes because they were drug mules. And he was talking about drug traders, but people took that and said, see, he made a physically disparaging remark about Hispanics and he's a racist. And then there's been other things, right? Along the way, he has retweeted some tweets from some well-known neo-Nazi accounts. There's been a string of unfortunate things on his part. And this week he had an interview with the New York Times in which he said, okay, so this is the actual quote from Steve King. Quote, "White nationalist, white supremacist, Western civilization, how did that language become offensive? Why did I sit in classes teaching me about the merits of our history and our civilization?" Now, Steve King has been a stalwart conservative up here, okay? I give credit where it's due. This guy has been really strong on a lot of conservative issues, and if it weren't for these continued forays into weird alt-right language, he'd be somebody that really everybody up here could really rally behind. But it's so continually distracting because he keeps saying things like this, and it's harder and harder to convince people that it's an accident. So I wrote an article a few months ago about not just King but other figures that have kind of dabbled in that stuff as well, saying, hey, people are playing fast and loose with the definition of racism. It's a real word. It has a real definition. It's very specific. And a lot of things that he says cannot be called that. Unfortunately, I don't know how you can really say that when somebody asks how the term white supremacist became offensive. I mean, am I being crazy here, or is white nationalist pretty much, or white supremacist pretty much always offensive?
I don't know of any non-offensive. I mean, the definition is there in the word, white, and then supremacist, meaning that the white people are supreme. So I'm not sure you can really say that and not understand what it means and why it's offensive.
Right. And I mean, and again, he did come out with a statement saying that it was a freshman mistake, I think. And his team has kind of come out and said, well, he didn't mean it that way. And there's always clarifications when you're dealing with a politician, right? So that's been the case. But meanwhile, all these Republicans have sort of come out to denounce Steve King and say that language doesn't belong here, and rightfully so. You know, our 2 senators here in the state have said that. He's got a primary challenge. Conservative talk show host Ben Shapiro has come out and maxed out a contribution to Steve King's primary challenger and encouraged others to do the same. But at the same time this is going on, the Women's March had a little controversy of their own when one of the ladies involved with them, Tamika Mallory, apparently went on The View and called Louis Farrakhan the greatest of all time. For people who are not familiar with Louis Farrakhan, he was a Nation of Islam activist who once compared Jewish people to termites.
That was Farrakhan?
Oh, yeah. Big history of... Yeah. There's a big history of anti-Semitism there, and the interesting part is that, you know, this reaction. Now, granted, King is a congressman, right? So you'd expect a little more reaction there. But Republicans are so fast to go after anybody who talks about race, goes after race, says anything remotely racist. But on the other side, we've got this strain of anti-Semitism that is sort of pervading different parts of the left. It's pretty rare to find open condemnation of folks over there until it gets super, super, super egregious. So both sides clearly have problems with race, and I would argue that those problems have gotten worse in the past few years after, unfortunately, a presidency that was marked by a lot of racial upheaval in between different communities in the last president, and this president clearly has not made anything better. So we're going to go into some of the racial politics tonight, racial cultural lines, and the discussion on that, as well as the IQ channel. It actually ties in here pretty closely, more than you might think if you get into the alt-right world, which we're going to drag you through tonight, unfortunately. Are you familiar with the King controversy at all, Josh?
Not really beyond what you've said just now.
Oh, well, I'm glad to be educational in that case.
Well, I knew most before you said it, but...
Okay. Yeah, no, the problem is this. So King is a little bit of a sore spot here in Iowa, right? But he's just not the only one. And it's really frustrating because, for 8 years under President Obama, folks on the right, conservatives and libertarians, were really frustrated by the identity politics, right? It seemed like there was this constant tide of identity politics and minority this and minority that, and just on and on and on about special groups of people who needed special privileges and special rights. And it just got really frustrating because a lot of us just we don't want to dive into a racially divided America. It just doesn't sound like a good place to live. I mean, we've been working for a long time now to advance civil rights across the board, to sort of realize MLK's vision. And MLK, Martin Luther King Day, is right around the corner. We wanted to realize his vision of a country and a world where people would be judged not on the color of their skin, but on the content of their character. And we seem to be going backwards in that department.
That's really very essential to the whole, idea of freedom. Freedom is an individual thing. Individual people are free. Races aren't free. White can't be free. Black can't be free. Only people can be free. And if our politics descends into these crude caricatures and these big blocks of people based on race, it really isn't possible to have a free society in that context.
Well, right, and a really frustrating part from a political standpoint is looking at this and having to most of my adult life now put up with these accusations of racism from folks on the left who really just want to hang that over and beat everybody over the head with it, right? If you oppose us on anything, it's because you're a racist, sexist, misogynist pig, And we get those accusations all the time, and you sort of just learn to blow them off. And a lot of the more famous and more accomplished Republican commentators at this point have sort of made a mockery of that continual SJW, race baiting. But then some, bafflingly and frustratingly, some on the right have broken off into the alt-right and have it's sort of like they heard these accusations of racism and went, oh, you want to see racist? Here, hold my beer. They just went full on crazy in the race department and have decided to embrace what they call race realism, which is, in my opinion, just a rehashing of 1930s, racial fascism is really what it is. I mean, it's really ugly.
Yeah, I mean, it's very similar to the eugenics that was popular at the time, the same sort of thinking.
Right, and it's all very cloaked in science, right? Everybody wants to be very scientific about it, very like, oh, well, if you oppose this, you deny science, and a lot of the controversy over Charlottesville. If you remember Charlottesville, this was where 200 or 300 neckbeards from all over America decided to get together and hold tiki torches and pretend they're tough guys, and this was, it was led by this, I don't even want to say his name, honestly. It was led by an alt-right leader who is an open white supremacist, white nationalist. By the way, interestingly, he's also very liberal in his policies. He's pro-universal health care. He's pro-abortion. I mean, this guy is very much not in alignment with any conservatives, really, on policy. So, but he likes Donald Trump for some reasons that are probably apparent in rhetorical reasons. And Charlottesville got together, and this became sort of a touchstone, right, for everybody on the left that wants to smear conservatives and Republicans in general with racism as well. Look at Charlottesville. Somebody got killed. There was violence erupted. The Tiki Torch rally. It was a ridiculous thing. But
and there were some actual bona fide white supremacists there.
Oh, for sure.
I mean, like
in fact, I think all of them were there.
all 200 of them from all over the country. But yeah, like you said, Joel. Generally speaking, when the left, when lefties use those terms, call us white supremacists, call us racists, it's usually just completely unjustified slander. But in the case of Charlottesville at the Unite the Right rally, there actually were some real neo-Nazis there. So they are. I mean, granted, they're few and far between. Good luck trying to actually go out and find one. But if they decide to collect themselves all in one place like that, there actually are a few in the country who sadly legitimize to an extent the stereotypes.
Right, and I think there's a couple reasons for that. There's a small group of them, but they're growing, and I think part of it is actually a response to the taboo on the topic that has been raised by the social justice left, which is we're not going to talk about this. We're the only ones who are allowed to talk about this, and we're only going to do it in our capacities. If you're white, you're not allowed to talk about race because you're privileged, blah, 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 blah. And the natural reaction to that, as any, evangelical from the 90s will tell you, if you tell people not to do something, there's a certain segment of society that are just going to do it for only that reason. And I think that's what you're seeing in part of this is just, you got these edgelords over here who are, hiding in their parents' basements and a bunch of neckbeards who've never been married or had kids, and they just want to be edgy. That's their goal, is 15 minutes of outrage on YouTube. And so the way to do that in today's culture is you find something that people are hypersensitive about, and then you just crap all over it, And that's what a lot of these people have done. That's how a lot of them have gotten their following, is by exploiting the left's outrage machine. And the left, to their, the equally frustrating, I guess I'll say, they don't realize that they're actually giving these people a platform. They think they're destroying them when they quit back on Twitter, not realizing that the retweet probably gets more attention than anything else the person would have originally done. And this is a lesson millennials are learning.
It was a couple months ago. They tried to do a Unite the Right 2 rally, a year after Charlottesville. And I'll have to look up the numbers, but the number of people who showed up to counter-protest and to denounce white supremacism, I think outnumbered the number of white supremacists there by like 10 to 1.
Yeah.
So they had a white supremacist, it was Unite the Right 2. They had a white supremacist rally, and basically nobody showed up to it except a bunch of angry people who hated white supremacism and wanted to denounce it.
Right. But see, that's where, in the term that you just said, that's the problem right there, is that they had a rally and they didn't call it white supremacists are us, because then nobody would have given any attention. Nobody would have cared, right? Fringe groups meet all the time and they have their little sessions and nobody cares. The reason that people cared is because it was called Unite the Right. And this was an opportunity for people to slander the broader conservative cause by associating it with these, wackos. That said, there has been a real unfortunate effect of a handful of people who are, especially online figures, who have sort of mainstreamed this idea and are starting to try to infiltrate the right with this, the actual conservative constitutional right with this. And it's really unfortunate. It's something that Democrats have warned about for a long time, and a lot of people on the right just dismiss it offhand. Unfortunately, I know enough of folks that have gone that way that I know it's not just a passing thing. There is a fringe group that is trying to influence policy in that direction. And one of those folks who has drawn a lot of controversy recently somebody that I used to follow and admire for their more libertarian positions on things. This guy by the name of Stefan Molyneux, very, very smart guy. He's very up on libertarian thought. He's one of those types of guys he knows a lot about a lot of things. He can teach you about Bitcoin. He can teach you about de Tocqueville. He can talk to you about sociology and just all sorts of different areas. He's got a popular YouTube channel, but he's gone off on this. The new wave of racism is called race realism. That's what they call themselves, right? Race realists.
Yes, and every time we use the term race realist on this podcast, understand we are making air quotes with our fingers when we say it.
Right, absolutely. Race realists, quote, quote. Okay. So Molyneux had a tweet the other day where he said, and I quote, "If we had been allowed to talk about race and IQ, the invasion of Iraq would never have occurred because no one would have been under the illusion that a Jeffersonian republic was going to emerge from a population with an IQ in the 80s. Opposing science got more than 500,000 people killed." I saw this and it was sort of like, in Star Wars Episode 3, if you acknowledge that the prequels actually exist, Revenge of the Sith, there's a really painful moment where you're watching Anakin Skywalker sit there and wait for Mace Windu to get back from the Jedi, or not from the temple, from the Senate. And you're like, please don't go. Just stay in your room, because you know what's going to happen, right? You know, once he gets in that ship and leaves, like everything's going to go down, and the whole thing's going to unravel. And you're just like, please don't go there. Please don't go there. And that's exactly what happened here with Stefan Molyneux. I was looking at this tweet, and it's not the first time, right? I saw him starting down this road a while ago, and I was like, oh, man, don't go there, man. You're way too smart for this. Don't go down this road. But sure enough, he went, and things are unraveling. It's just really, really awful. But what, Josh, when you see a tweet like that, what do you think?
Well, I think a lot of things. Let's make sure I understand this tweet correctly, Joel. If I'm interpreting what you quoted there correctly, he's basically saying that the people of Iraq, because they are brown, are too dumb to have a republic. And that's why it failed. Is that what I'm getting?
I don't know another way that you can interpret that. I really don't know another way that you can interpret that. He has a fixation on IQ that I think justifies it in this, but go ahead, continue.
Oh, yeah. I mean, well, what I see here in this and in people who embrace race realism in general is this fixation on IQ as a sort of a be-all, end-all quality. And it obviously isn't. I mean, what is IQ even? IQ is like a very gross, sort of a crude way of measuring, general intelligence. You say the raw computing power of the brain, you might say.
Well, to be technical, it is a way of measuring or computing unintelligence. That was actually the point of the test when it was invented, was to measure unintelligence, find out who were the real idiots. I'm not kidding. Look up the history of it. Oh,
no, yeah, I believe it. But the thing is, he talks about saying, what he's saying there is basically that dumb people can't have a republic. That just seems so very short-sighted to me, because what you need to have a republic is primarily a respect for the law and a respect for your neighbors. If we're going to join together and have a republic, basically we're all agreeing that instead of fighting each other, we're going to vote and have our representatives come to rational adult agreements. And I'm sorry, but that isn't an idea that really takes a great deal of intelligence to understand. The idea of we're going to have representatives, and they're going to sit and they're going to talk out our differences, and that's how we're going to solve our problems. That's not a complex idea. You don't need to be a rocket scientist or a genius to get that. Where is he even coming from, saying that anybody is too unintelligent to understand how to have a republic?
Well, yeah, and this is an idea that is kind of pervading the alt-right circles, right? There are a lot of folks who talk about IQ as this sort of global currency, right? It's kind of a global currency that people deal in, and if your country has a high IQ, then you need to keep out the people with the low IQ, because otherwise they'll balance you out. And like seriously, it really is. And I don't think I have to really speak to how many times in history that sort of idea has ended badly, but there's no scientific basis for it either.
Well, you mentioned, okay, so we got to keep the high IQ, or I'm sorry, we got to keep the low IQ people out of our country, because that's how we'll keep our own society peaceful and stable. Okay, if you look at IQ levels from like around the world, Asian people, Chinese people especially, are the highest IQ people. You go to China, go to Japan, that's where the high IQs are. And China and Japan both had policies exactly like what you just mentioned. They both had, for long periods of time, isolationist policies in which they kept all foreigners, all foreign influences out of their countries, to do just what you said, to keep the barbarians out, to keep the dumb, all the dumb, savage white people out of Japan so that they didn't corrupt their pure and good culture. So, and the result of that for China and Japan was that they fell behind and they ended up being conquered and overtaken by stronger powers from outside. So what these alt-right people are advocating, these race realists are advocating by saying we need to keep the dumb people out and keep the smart people in. Well, that's been done before, and look what happened.
Well, yeah, and I want to be careful to say, when I said it's unscientific, there is Josh and I were actually involved in an online debate on this that was pretty extensive. He wrote an interesting kind of an article or a note about it that we'll link to in the show notes to give some context on this. But there's a long debate about how scientific the IQ test actually is, and if it is scientific, what its uses and what its practicality actually is. But that's a different question than the question that we're really dealing with tonight, which fundamentally is, does IQ affect or limit human capacity, and in what way? And that's sort of the question that I think Molyneux is talking about as well. He's not saying, look, these people score lower, therefore we might need to change the way that we are propping up their education system or something like that. That's not the case he's making. He's literally just saying these people are too dumb to handle democracy, so they're just better off stuck with tyranny. I mean, we just and again, this is not, I also want to specify, this is not an argument for or against the Iraq war, okay? Totally different issue. And I think Josh and I would line up on a foreign policy vision that would say we probably shouldn't have gone in there anyway, which is sort of the libertarian position on that. But that has nothing. Our rationale for that was not these people are too dumb to deserve freedom.
No, not at all.
so different. Always carefully define what you're saying and what you're not saying, right?
Yeah, that just sounds so ridiculous when you said that. It's like, I just can't. It's not an argument that would have even occurred to me to think about making. It's like, that's nuts.
Yeah, and it's also, I know that this is not exactly a scientific way of measuring it either, but I would tend to look at Iraq and say, hey, most of them at least are not concerned about, Miley Cyrus's drinking habits.
Which, but there you go. Okay, so again, using air quotes every time I say it, the race realists think that IQ is the be all to end all. But again, IQ is, it's analogous to the raw processing power. And let's grant them all of their assumptions. Let's grant them everything for the sake of argument and say that people of some races have more powerful brains than others. That doesn't really make any difference, because no matter how powerful a machine is, unless you put it to constructive purposes, it doesn't do any good for you. Okay, so let's say that we people in America have more powerful brains, but we're spending all of our brain power by arguing about Miley Cyrus and her drinking habits.
Right.
We're spending all of our brain power trying to own each other, trying to out-clever each other on the internet, to own and humiliate the other side. We're spending our brain power being clever trolls. Well, what good is it? How is that helping us out any? It's like, and I think, just as far as things, in the last 100 years, we'll say the last 150 years, things that have caused great human suffering, there's one really, really bad idea that has caused more suffering and more death and more human degradation probably than any other idea in history. And that idea is, sorry guys, Marxism. Marxism is a really bad idea, and anywhere it is taken seriously, most prominently in the Soviet Union and in Mao's China, it causes famine, and it causes tyranny, and it causes dystopian conditions.
Purges.
Yes, purges. And okay, so Karl Marx, obviously a very intelligent man. I don't know what his IQ was. They didn't have IQ tests back then, but I'm guessing Karl Marx would have had a really high IQ. And he came up and he used his IQ, he used his superior brain power to come up with the worst idea ever. He came up with an idea so bad and so terrible that a person with a less powerful brain couldn't even have done it.
Yep.
And that idea spread. So in Russia is if you look at a map of IQs in the world, Russia is a pretty high IQ place. China is like the highest IQ place. All the Asian countries have high IQs, and these are all places where Marxism took hold and dystopian conditions flourished.
Mhm.
So it matters what you do. I mean, to say that if you have an IQ that's going to make you have a good life, that's going to make you wise or anything like that is obviously just nonsense. Because it doesn't matter how powerful your brain is; it matters what you use it for.
Right. And so then the question has to be asked though, and this is, again, if folks want to go do some research into the validity and the limitations of IQ testing and IQ scoring and the way that it's, I mean, there's a lot of concerns with it just because of facts like the Flynn effect that show that IQ is not static, that IQ actually rises or falls in groups depending on education and nourishment and other factors like that. But if you want to go research that, definitely go for it. The question though that next needs to be asked here is, does IQ limit potential, either on on an individual basis or on a national basis? Are we tied to our intelligence as far as our human potential goes?
Well, yes, but not really.
That's an unhelpful answer, Josh Hugo.
Well, let me go to that. And see, the thing is, the mistake that these race realist people make, I mean, one of the mistakes they make is to take this one quality, and all racists do this, no matter what flavor of racism a person has, whether they're racist towards blacks, towards whites, whatever, racism always takes one quality and elevates it to be of supreme importance. And these race realist people are doing that with IQ. They're taking IQ and saying, this is the one thing, this is the quality that determines success, that determines, whether or not you're fit to live in a free society or whatever. But there are so many other qualities that matter just as much, if not more. So does IQ limit you? Well, it limits you in some ways. Yeah. But there are 101 other qualities that are just as important that need to be accounted for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and when people talk about this, when people talk about when I suppose race realists is who I'm talking about, they talk about it in terms that would suggest that IQ differences between groups are paramount, generally speaking. But what's interesting is that the folks who are really into the science of the intelligence quotient of the IQ will tell you that IQ differences are much broader within populations than across populations, meaning that it really does come down to the individual when you're talking about intelligence. At any level, it's always going to come down to the individual because you can't predict who is going to be able to do what within these populations. Now, the same thing can be said in a lot of other human traits, right? I am not a very athletic guy. My dad, on the other hand, was super athletic. He used to play basketball for the Navy, had all sorts of sports stuff going on all the time. And I grew up and I was a bookworm and a bit of a nerd and didn't really get into it. But I did play some basketball. And I quickly realized I was never going to be as good as most of the guys on that court. And a lot of me wanted to give up. But my dad, being a good coach, used this line on me. He said, hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard. I'm sure it's probably something that's thrown around by coaches everywhere as sort of one of those generic motivational things, But it meant a lot to me because what I was thinking was, you know what? This guy is 6'4". He's older than I am. As a teenager, that means a lot. He's older than I am. He's taller than I am. He's faster than I am. And he's a better shot than I am. There's really not much I can do against this guy other than foul him and hope for the best, But that line was something that always reminded me when I thought of that is, you know what? This guy, he might have all the talent edge in the world, but I can still outwork him. That's one thing that I can do. And it doesn't matter how talented he is. I can outwork him. And that's the great equalizer. And that's sort of the idea in some ways that America was founded on, right? It was not all the best and brightest people who came over here. In fact, in a lot of cases, it was the rejects who came to the United States from Britain and founded the colonies. And so when we look at that, like they're really, if that's the determining factor in human civilization, then there's a lot of countries that probably wouldn't be here today. But a lot of this, like you said, it's not just about intelligence. It's about what you do with it. It's about dedication. It's about hard work, all these other attributes that we really have lost, I believe anyway, we've lost context for in our generation because we're so preoccupied with our genes. And not blue genes, genes like genetics. I think that is sort of a millennial preoccupation. It's a theory that I have. I really see a lot of signs that the millennial generation, our generation, is potentially the most fatalistic, deterministic generation in recent memory. I mean, we just really we have this preoccupation with fatalism and, well, I was born this way, so there's nothing I can do. Well, we're stuck in the same class, we're stuck in the same economic status, we're stuck in whatever because there's somebody else has privilege and I don't. I mean, we're just really, really obsessed with this. And I think this race realism is just another expression of that.
Oh, yeah. Kind of go off on a tangent of what you're saying there, as far as hard work is one of the things that matters. Your dedication to pursue a goal, but I think probably the single biggest factor that determines success of both individuals and of societies is what do you want? What are your values of your society?
Wow, it really puts a new twist on tell me what you want, what you really, really want.
Oh man.
Who would have thought Spice Girls had the key to civilization?
I'm telling. Oh, Joel, I'm doubting your IQ. What's your IQ? I'm starting to have questions about anyway. But yeah, so it's like people. If what you want is something that is foolish or that's counterproductive, or that is self-harmful, then it doesn't matter how smart you are or how hardworking you are. If you're going toward a goal that is foolish or wrong. Conversely, if you have a good goal, this is why parenting matters so much. And the race realist will say it's IQ. That's not really true. What's the one determining factor that determines a person's, I guess you want to say destiny more than anything else, is their relationship with their parents. And what does a person want? What are their values? What are their goals? And the parent is the primary influence on that. To a very large extent. Of course, that's not fate either. You can have terrible parents and still turn out well. And there's lots of examples of that. But as far as what the primary influence is, your parents are the ones who more or less set you on a path. And if that path is a good path that you've been set on, and you're applying your intelligence and you're applying your diligence to that good path, then you're probably going to go to a good place. Conversely, if your parents put you on a bad path, you're probably going to go to a bad place. And that matters, I guess, regardless of how hard you're working or how smart you are, because where are you going? The destination matters,
So let me push back on you a little bit on that. What just to be more specific, what do you mean by your goals and where you're going? Are you talking about career goals? Are you talking about family goals? What?
Oh, I guess you'd say I'm primarily talking about what I would call religion. And by religion, I don't mean, certain rituals or even specific beliefs. I mean your overall values. Like, what do you believe the purpose of your life is? What do you believe that your relationship to the universe and to other people is? And, how do you pronounce that guy's name? Stefan who?
Molyneux.
Molyneux. Sorry, it's spelled with an X. It's French. Yeah. I'm assuming it's French. I can't pronounce French words.
Well, French spell things that way because they clearly don't have the IQ that we have. So,
jeez. No, their IQ. See, their IQ is so high.
That was sarcasm, people. It was sarcasm.
The French have such a high IQ that they can waste their brain power on extra letters. See, that's why they don't advance.
One day we'll find out that his name is secretly like a super equation that explains most of life.
Yes.
Anyway, go ahead. The X was a variable. No.
Yes. That's good. But yeah, so he's saying that these that people in Iraq aren't smart enough to have democracy. Well, it doesn't really matter. Like I said, it's not a complicated idea. It doesn't matter if you're smart enough for democracy. It matters, well, do you actually want democracy? And even in a more general sense, because democracy is only just a form of government. In a more general sense, do you value your neighbors? Jesus gave us the golden rule. Do unto others, you would have them do unto you. Do you practice that? Do you value the good? Do you value the rights and the dignity of other people as much as your own? Or do you see other people sort of as objects or as obstacles for you to exploit or to overcome? And your parents, to a large extent, that your parents instill in you those sort of perspectives, those sort of values,
Yeah, and I think, going back to Reverend King, what he said, because he gave a standard for judgment there, right? It just wasn't the color of someone's skin or their IQ. It was the content of their character. And to me, that's the word that sums it up best in terms of your capacity for a civilization and your ability to have a cohesive, democratic, free society is character. Because you can have all the intelligence in the world and have no character. It won't get you anywhere. You'll have a society of murderous thieves who are very cunning in the way that they do things.
And those Nazis were real smart people. I mean,
seriously
though. I mean, like the Nazis under Hitler, I mean, there was a lot of really genius, high IQ people in that leadership, and there was like a lot of scientific advancements that went on during the Nazi years. I guess the Nazis are a good example of what happens when you have intelligence without values.
Well, right, and then on the other side of that, you also have a lot of people throughout history. You can call them the Forrest Gumps of history, right? Who are not very intelligent people, who probably will never ace a lot of tests, who have done incredibly innovative and heroic things for America and for the world at large. Whether it's Medal of Honor winners in the military and people who have done tremendous acts of bravery and sacrifice, or people who have come up with just simple innovations to make life better. That maybe is not like inventing the microwave, but it's if you watch the show Shark Tank. It's truly an amazing show because people come up with just the simplest innovations that can change so many people's lives. And a lot of these folks are not rocket scientists. They're not rocket scientists. A lot of them are very normal people. Some of them are very only minimally educated. And yet they come up with these ways to improve your everyday life that you might not even know about. You just go into Walmart, you see it on the shelf, you don't think there's a story behind it. But a lot of normal people do this. And so, there's always two sides of it, right? You have these folks who are highly intelligent. And I think in our generation, especially, a lot of folks who are highly intelligent and highly educated and are also highly worthless. And then you have a lot of folks who are, kind of normal blue collar folks who, by getting to know them and meeting them, you really wouldn't think there's much to them at all. But they get things done because they have character, and like you talked about, they're looking at goals that are beyond, I want to sit here and turn out a provoking blog post.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they have goals that are outwardly focused, focused toward helping their families, helping their communities, serving their religious values, as opposed to, like you've been saying, a lot of the really intelligent people on our side today tend toward narcissism. They tend toward self-pity. They tend toward sort of a self-pitying, woe, poor is me attitude because they haven't gotten things they think they deserve and they think they're helpless about it.
Mm-hmm. And so what are some other? Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say that as far as how people use their intelligence, it's like your intelligence can be used to subvert yourself and to harm yourself. You can think yourself into a depression. You can think yourself into futility. One of the worst things you can do with intelligence is you can spin elaborate deceptions around yourself. Mm-hmm. You can bury the truth behind 25 layers of obfuscation where nobody can see it. And that takes intelligence to do.
Right. It's not really a common problem to dumb people.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, there's problems with everybody, but I also think just very quickly that a lot of the best human systems, whether it be government systems or social systems or economic systems, presume incomplete knowledge and presume a diversity of intelligence. They really do. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is that one of the reasons that capitalism is so great is you don't have to be smart to take advantage of it. You really don't. You make shoes. You can sweep streets. You can clean gutters. You can start a software company. It doesn't really matter what your talent is, just that you're willing to use it and that you're willing to have a product or service to make yourself useful in some capacity to someone. But what are some other examples of things that influence culture and society maybe more than IQ does?
I mean, that's you're going through you're opening up all of anthropology there. That's obviously a question we can't really answer decisively here. But
oh darn, you had a whole 30 seconds, man.
Sorry, I'll compose a really smart tweet later that'll explain all of anthropology in 120 characters.
Yeah, right. You and Twitter. Yeah, like that's gonna happen.
Yeah, well. What was the question? I'm sorry.
No, what other factors?
I got all thinking about my ultimate tweet that would explain the universe, and I forgot what the question was.
Well, shall we leave you to ponder that for a few minutes?
But I mean, there's so many factors. Let's say parentage. Race realists and social justice warriors alike will look at the wealth disparity between black and white Americans, and the disparity is quite real and quite large. I'm looking at stats right now that say that for every $100 a white family earns in America, a black family earns 57. So it is a really quite a big and substantial wealth difference between black and white.
Link
and
in the show notes.
Link in the show notes. The social justice warriors, the Democrats on the left, they'll say, well, that's because of systemic racism. That's because there are hidden prejudices and biases that are subverting work against black people. On the other side, you'll have the alt-right, the so-called race realists will say, well, that's because white people have the higher IQ and they just do better because they're smarter. But there are things that have so much more significance as correlations than that. The primary one, of course, being parents. Yeah, it is very true. If you take race out of it, if you take race out and ignore it completely, you have correlations between things like, for instance, family structure. Sadly, tragically, a substantial majority of black children are born without fathers. They're born to single mothers and do not live with their father and are not raised, in a whole nuclear family. And of course, this is changing, but still today, it's still a small majority of white children are raised in intact nuclear families and do have their fathers around. And so that's the correlation between with wealth. The correlation between wealth and having a father in the home is so much stronger than the correlation between wealth and race. So it's really just really ridiculous to take the race, which of course they say correlates with IQ, to take that and from either end to say that must be the factor that's influencing this, when there is the parenting factor, which is so much more obvious and with which the correlation is so much stronger.
And, part of my question on this whole thing, too, when you get into IQ and people trying to predict human capability with it is, what if they're right? What if we are, and a lot of people will say, it's evident that people are not all gifted and talented in the same ways. So why should it be? And I will say, especially those who subscribe to kind of an evolutionary worldview, would look at it and say, okay, well, I would dispute scientifically that men are created equal. And so it's evident that people have different talents and abilities and strengths and weaknesses and everything. So why should it be unthinkable to us that, certain races would have advantage or disadvantage in terms of intelligence? And what I would say, I guess, is that, even if you put all the scientific questions aside and all the sociological questions aside, forget that the first half of the 20th century ever happened, and grant all those assumptions, where do you go from there? What are the conclusions that you draw from that, as far as what we should be doing on a national level, on a global level? What are the conclusions that stem from that belief, if it is true?
Well, that's what the article that I wrote that you referred to earlier was basically about. And I concluded that because, again, grant them all of the assumptions. If everything the race realists say is actually true and some races are smarter than others, even so, you can't use that to predict an individual's intelligence or an individual's success. So even if everything they say is all true, you still have to judge people as individuals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's the miracle of human capacity and human creativity, is that you never know from which country the cure from cancer will spring. We really don't know that. And people from all nations have contributed to different things. And whether you want to talk about a difference in scope and scale and privilege and all of those things, sure, the course of human history has been messy. There's been countries that have been set back technologically for decades by things like war or famine or disease. I mean, in centuries in some cases. And then there's countries like Japan that, have only joined the modern world in the last 150 years, but then they came zooming back and passed everyone. So there's a lot of factors that go into it. But I think fundamentally, IQ, and not just IQ, but a lot of these fake measuring sticks that we throw around to try to make ourselves feel better than other people. But IQ in particular, it might describe capacity, but not value. And I think there's a key difference between those two things. Because there's a lot of different things, right? Whether it's intelligence or education or tools and technology, the internet, they all increase our capacity, but they don't really determine what we'll do with that capacity, right? And you sort of alluded to this earlier, where a person who doesn't have those advantages are somewhat limited in what they can do, whether for good or for bad. Somebody that has the benefit of those advantages has a much greater capacity. But if you want to talk about it in terms of wavelength and frequency and magnitude, you're changing the wavelength. You're changing the magnitude. You're not changing the frequency. You really have someone who has a lot of capacity for good or evil. They can turn either way. And Stalin, I always like to go back to Stalin. Stalin was a very educated, very intelligent person. He probably would not have been able to inflict near the torment on the world that he did if he had been an idiot. And meanwhile, you've got people who are brilliant, like I think of like Ben Carson, who's done incredible surgery, really made huge progress in the surgical fields in the U.S. And he would not have had that capacity. He was born with that. He was blessed with that capacity, and he used it to serve mankind. And so really the difference of value is completely different than capacity. What value do we bring to society? What value are we going to leave in history? And that, I think, is a question that's independent. And what I mean is, there are people who I know who are probably never going to be hailed as a genius, but they're decent. They're decent people. They're good. They have good character. They've raised good families. They've lived a life of sacrifice. And to me, those are things worth remembering. Those are things worth celebrating. In many cases, much more than someone who is brilliant. A lot of people are brilliant and worthless. A lot of people are brilliant and arrogant. And so when I look at that on an individual level, I think those are some of the things that are most important. What do you think, Josh Hugo?
Well, I think I'd pose this question. If you had to choose a leader to lead your country or your group, do you want a leader who is super intelligent, or do you want a leader who is morally good? Which quality is more important in your leader?
Oh, well, it depends. What's the country next door got for a leader?
Well, I don't think it really matters, because as you're talking, you mentioned Stalin, and a lot of, Stalin or Mao or Hitler, and these are all smart people. A good leader is someone who leads by example, who leads by inspiring others. And a person who tries to micromanage and control others is most likely going to be a bad leader, for a variety of reasons. I don't want to go into exactly what makes a good or bad leader. But a good leader leads by example, leads by inspiration. A bad leader leads by micromanagement. And I'm thinking, as you're talking here, actually, I think a very intelligent leader can actually be a pitfall and a drawback, because being very intelligent makes you prone to arrogance and prone to a desire to micromanage.
Or sometimes indecisiveness.
Yeah, definitely indecisiveness for sure. Because when you can see all the options. I know some people who have that. I know some people in my own life who are extremely intelligent, and their intelligence kind of works against them because they can see all the options that are open and they can't choose.
Guilty.
It's paralyzing. But by the same
token, not guilty
of
intelligence, guilty of indecision. I want to clarify, okay?
Okay. Indecision for ambiguous reasons.
Right.
But by the opposite token, it's like, if you have a leader who maybe isn't that smart, who maybe isn't the smartest guy with the best ideas, but he's good. You have a person who values his subordinates, who is of good moral character and is guided, in his agenda by good morality. That's going to be a much better leader than someone who just has a super fast, mind, but does not have the moral character. One thing is obviously more important than the other in a leader.
Well, Josh, you get the last word on it on tonight's program, but you're not going to get the last word ultimately, because you, the listeners, are going to get the last word on this. What do you think about the whole race and IQ and culture tie-up that the alt-right's got going on? Where do you think we're headed as a country? Are we getting better? Are we getting worse on race relations? And maybe most importantly, how do we diffuse that race bomb? With the different sides kind of at each other's throats all the time, with the accusations of racism being thrown around and some people actually validating those accusations. How do we pull the country back together? How do we get rid of these gnawing ideas that are eating at us across racial lines? And is that possible with where we're at? We'll be talking to you this week on social media. Make sure you follow us on Facebook.com/TheCI Show and on Twitter @TheCI Show. And we will talk to you next week. Thanks for tuning in to Constructive Interference.